Good morning. I'm Tom Radcliffe at ActiveState Software.
And sorry, I don't know if you're prompting me or not. I'll let you continue.
And I'm joined by Jason McIntosh.
Hi, I'm Jason McIntosh.
And we are talking about Perl this morning. So I'll let Jason introduce himself.
Hello, I am, as the slide says, I'm Jason McIntosh. I co-authored a book. I'm just reading my own bullets here, but I co-authored a book quite a while ago, which you can still purchase from O'Reilly Media, called Perl XML. I've been working with Perl since the first .com bubble, and that was my first software engineering job, and I've basically been working with it daily since then in many, many tasks for a number of years as a salaried employee of one company or university or other entity or another, and since 2008 as a independent consultant. And I use it for a number of personal projects and experiments and random internet gewgaws as well.
Cool, thank you. And I'm Tom Radcliffe, the Director of Engineering at ActiveState. I'm a physicist by education and consider myself a lapsed Perl person. Back in the .com bubble times, I was Director of Engineering at a company that made a product called GeneLinker, which was a bioinformatics analysis program that had embedded Perl as a scripting language, which was a big thing at the time. And I've since run my own company, and I've been the Director of Engineering at ActiveState since July of 2015, which was the point at which ActiveState was a Perl on Windows company, essentially. They developed a product called Staccato, which was a private platform as a service product that was sold to Hewlett-Packard in August of 2015. So we were refocusing the company on languages, particularly Perl, because it's our first thing. So we're here to talk about Perl, past, present, and future. And I know you've been involved in Perl continuously over time, Jason. And I'm just fundamentally curious about your perceptions of what it has been like to see Perl from the late 1990s, when it was the next big thing. It was the duct tape of the internet. It was one of the most important languages in the world, to today, when it's still one of the most important languages in the world, but it just gets much less press, much less talked about.
Yeah, well, as a preamble, I should say, just to make clear that I'm not involved with the development of the language itself at all. I sometimes make small doc patches here or there to a module or something on CPAN, but the whole Perl community, including the user community and everyone who makes all the modules on CPAN and maintains those, and all the hackers of the language itself, I am simply a leech upon this entire ecosystem. I have simply been I primarily identify as a user of Perl for all these years, and something that's developed it itself. But speaking as such a person, it's not so much. I would say that when I started using Perl in the late 90s, it was less seen as the next big thing as the thing, period. My first software engineering job, much like every engineering job I've had since then, was centered around making web-based applications. And if that's what you were doing in the 90s, Perl was not literally the only solution for doing it, but it was a ubiquitous solution for making web apps. That has changed in the many years since then, and that is good, because just more choices are better. And as new engineering technologies emerge, and the spotlight and the energy and the excitement moves from one thing to another, yeah, like Perl had its time in the sort of mainstream spotlight already, and I can understand how that would lead to a misperception that, oh well, therefore nobody uses Perl anymore. It's more that nobody talks about Perl anymore, in that it's not this wonderful, exciting technology that lets you write CGI forms. Like, that was amazing. Like, I remember making radio buttons in 1998 and just being blown away. The time for being really excited for that, that is in our past. But as you say, it's not like, Perl has continued to develop. It's had a very interesting story, a lot of ups and downs in the years since then. And the summary of my own relationship with it is that, yeah, I did start using it when it was the thing to use, and I've never really had a reason to put it for my first choice to go to for like a general purpose programming language. I've never had a reason to put it down. And the main reason for that is its community is just so fantastic, both in the sense of being a community who's willing to help people, and also in maintaining this fantastic ecosystem of the language itself and the whole universe of all the language extensions and modules and applications that you can find on CPAN. Most recently, I'm working on an experimental project, which is it collects airline data, public airline data, and draws maps based on it. And I wanted to do things I'd never done before, like changing global coordinates and plotting them, like turning them into, like figuring out what where they would be on a Mercator projection versus another map projection, and figuring out the distance between 2 points on a sphere. I never had any reason to look for these in CPAN before, and I looked for them on CPAN, and there they were. And I've had this experience time and time again. My interest in Perl will wane when that is no longer the case, when I look for something and I cannot find it, and I don't know how to make it myself. But in the 18 years I've been using Perl, that has not happened.
Yeah, it seems like you'll be using Perl for life in that case, because that's been my experience as well. I've looked for things in CPAN that I had no reasonable expectation would be there. Fairly hardcore numerical stuff, ODE solvers, things like that. And gosh, there they were. And it's continued to amaze me, even as somebody who hasn't used Perl heavily in the last really decade. When I come back to it, I look around and I find that CPAN is now, I don't know, 5, 10 times bigger than it was in the early 2000s. And everything under the sun is just there, which is fairly remarkable.
Yeah, it does keep growing. There's a new-ish resource that has appeared in the last few years. I don't know when it was born, but called MetaCPAN, which is at, let me just make sure about this on my own browser, but I think it is at, yes, metacpan.org. And it's an alternate view onto the CPAN via the web, and it's fantastic.
Got
That is my short review.
No.
And it's influenced, and like Perl itself, like Larry Wall, in I think his 1999 address at the Perl conference, famously referred to Perl as a post-modern programming language. And the maintainers, the active maintainers of the language today, continue to hold that close to their hearts. And everyone who's working on major language level and language support level projects continue doing that, so that when other projects, like for example, I mean, to name one project that has a lot of spotlight and excitement and is doing excellent work is NPM. That's a JavaScript thing. I'm pretty sure. I think that stands for Node Package Manager. I say I think because I don't use it, but the friend of mine who got me my first engineering job and taught me Perl works for the NPM organization now, and that is an example of a separate engineering programming culture doing something great, and then what they're doing with package management and presenting that in a very friendly way feeds back into projects like MetaCPAN. And again, I say this as someone who works on neither project and simply observes and draws conclusions as a user.
You get
but I do see a lot of just feedback and Perl the Perl community successfully avoiding the trap of just closing itself off into a bubble and not paying attention to what the rest of the world is doing and freely borrowing and improving itself based on what other hacking and what other software engineering cultures are doing.
That's certainly been a big advantage. One of the things, so we got a poll coming up here, which I will put on the screen, which is, yeah, how long have people been using Perl? Because it's one of the curious things is that we've seen in our own data collection is that a lot of the people we ask in our customer base and the people who download ActiveState software have only been using Perl for a few years. Hang on a second, I'm seeing something funny on the screen here. Should I do anything? Good. Whereas I had the impression that most Perl users were, people like you and me, people who had started using it way back when and just kept on because it was a tool we were familiar with and it could always answer the questions and solve the problems that we had. Whereas what we're seeing today is, I think, a significant upswing in new adopters of the language because I think, A, it's very, very functional, very effective, very powerful, but also the community is so open, and it's not like some language communities where you're either inside the wall or you're outside. Perl is much more inclusive, and I think that's one of the things that's drawing new people to the language.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I'm really interested to hear more about ActiveState's own what they're finding among their customer base and their user base. The poll results I'm seeing right now are more in line with my own understanding, which is again a few years old. I attended the Perl conference for the first time in I think ever actually when it was YAPC. In 2013, so only 3 years ago, and its sort of exit poll from its attendees about how long they've been using Perl was weighted very heavily towards very long-time users and senior developers, and this led to a lot of existential muttering about the lack of newer developers and people who were not just using Perl as a legacy language. But yeah, but a lot of the best programmers I know in the language are 10 or more years younger than me, which is very exciting.
Yes.
And of course, it isn't just a youth thing too. It's just a lot of people come to the language for one thing or another. Some of that is going to be because they find themselves needing to like inheriting a legacy system, which that's certainly part of my business as well. Right. But I absolutely know that it's not the common case, but certainly a lot of companies, small and large consulting outfits, start greenfield brand new projects using Perl. I am one of them, and I'm a very tiny company, so I do not know how representative I am, but the community is such that I do this comfortably, and there is enough support that I don't think I'm making a mistake every time I, create a new Catalyst application or whatnot.
Yeah, no, I can see that. The thing that we're finding is, again, in our survey data, is one of what people are using Perl for is, as I think you alluded to earlier, much broader than just web stuff. And I understand that's where a lot of your business is. But we see a lot of companies that they just need to move a little data from a database into files or files into database. So they need to do a little bit of processing on weekly sales numbers, whatever. All of those small infrastructure tasks, which add up to a lot of stuff in even a medium-sized enterprise, can be handled very effectively by Perl. So I think there's a lot of uptake in that layer of the business that we just don't see unless we go out and ask people. And that is probably the cause of this much talked about thing, which 2 years ago I think Perl was seeing a definite, there was still, it looked like the user population was old, it was declining, there was a lot of angst around the language at that point. But in the last 2 years, there's been a definite uptick of interest, and new developers are coming to it because it solves the problems that they have and is also very fast. It's a very performant language for a scripting language. It's not necessarily something that you would choose over C in terms of performance, but I have had the experience of coding up numerical stuff in Perl because the libraries I wanted were available, and then thinking, I really want this to go faster, and recoding it in C, and yeah, seeing some improvement, but it's not as big as one might think. Mm-hmm. So it's a nice balance between ease of use, depth of support, and runtime speed. Which brings us to Perl 6. Which I know you're not a Perl 6 person, but do you think about Perl 6 at all?
I think about Perl 6 whenever someone asks me, so what about Perl 6, which is a question me and I'm sure many other people who are known among their colleagues or their customers or their coworkers or their concerned friends or family to be Perl people have had to field since circa 2000. I think Perl 6 is really interesting. To make a meaninglessly generic statement, it's really interesting. And the Perl conference is next week, and I am really genuinely interested to see what the conversation and the presence of Perl 6 is going to be there, because it famously had its Christmas release last week. This actually happened. It is a thing. You can download it and start using it. I have not yet, because my perception of Perl 6 for the last several years has been viewing the project as essentially a skunkworks for Perl 5, if we wish to make that designation. In that a transformative technology within Perl or Perl 5 for me that I learned within the last decade was learning modern Perl, like the whole family of techniques and philosophies that are summarized under the moniker modern Perl, and specifically Moose, which is a language extension that brings much more modernized, object-oriented programming techniques to regular old Perl. Basically, if you have Moose on your system, to make a long story short, in your Perl program, you started off with use Moose. It imports this behemoth into your program's memory, and then you can start declaring attributes and having Haza relationships and having method modifiers and all these things that are not in the core language at all, but are so delightful to work with. And
a port of Moose to Python.
I'm sorry, say again?
There's a port of Moose to Python.
I was not aware of that. I am aware that Moose has many ports of itself in Perl, because it is so huge that there is a whole family of minimized Mooses for Perl with names like Mouse and Oo, and these are very popular as well for people who just want subsets of this entire thing without the whole monster. I am extremely lazy, and I just use Moose in all my stuff.
Sure.
My point here being that Moose takes a lot of, my understanding is, now again, I don't work on Moose, but my understanding is that Moose takes a lot of its structure and its inspiration from work that was done by the Perl 6 development team over the entirety of the previous decade. And they basically, in the whole spirit of being postmodern again, said, that's great, let's backport it. And it works. So that's been my view of Perl 6, is just seeing it as a crazy laboratory. And then they had a release, and now it's a language. It's like every other programming language that is a general purpose programming language that seems very interesting to me. I haven't learned it, and I would love excuse to learn it someday. Maybe someone can pay me to learn it through a project. That is something I've done before. More likely is that through some application or domain or another, Perl 6 will make itself a domain-specific language for something I'm very interested in, and that is when I will pick it up. I learned Python, more or less, in order to make a video game 2 years ago, because my friend Andrew Plotkin has a system called Celtani, which runs on celtani.net. This is essentially a massively multiplayer text adventure game, and to extend it, you need to write Python. And I wanted to do that, so I wrote some Python. Yeah. I could totally see doing that with Perl 6. But until then, my view is it is a laboratory that turned into a language, and now it exists, and I'm fascinated to see what will become of it. And in the meantime, I will continue to use Perl and remember to start saying 5 and get into that habit. So.
Yeah, I actually have a proposal that the languages should just be renamed 5 and 6. And
just
Perl,
straight up 5 and 6?
Yeah. Perl can just float around there somewhere because it's something one, yes, I'm sure you know, continually have to explain that they're different languages even though they have the same name.
They are both in the Perl family of programming languages according to Wikipedia.
I believe that.
I really believe this. So
and you know, C and C++ are both in the, or C and Fortran are both in the Algol family of programming languages. That's really interesting, and that was something I haven't followed Perl 6 closely, and I agree absolutely. My threshold is fundamentally around what is the killer application for Perl 6? What is it that it does so well that will drive adoption of the language and interest in the language in the enterprise, which is where our customers are. But I hadn't really appreciated this process of backporting features from Perl 6 into Perl 5 as one of the things driving Perl 5 development. And I have, there's another poll, which is a question of what version people Perl people are using, which is interesting because I remember, and I'm sure you remember, back in probably the early 2000s, or maybe even, I guess even the late 90s, when Perl 6 was just coming up on the horizon, there was a real concern that the Perl 5 code base had become so complicated that the language had effectively become stable, that it wasn't practical to make the kinds of changes that people wanted. And I remember hearing things from people on the core Perl 5 team who were saying basically, you know, we can't progress this language further because of the internal complexity. And that's obviously proven ultimately not to be the case. And I think it's really interesting, without, you know, I like you, I'm an outsider in the language development community. But one of the things that we've seen internally is, if I have this correct, when we went out and we asked 18,000 people who downloaded our software, what version are you using? And we got about 2% response, which was enough to get some idea, be able to break out people who were using it in corporate settings versus individuals. And this is just a graph of the percentage of developers, that are using different versions of the language. You can see 10% are still using Perl 5.6, which really, I would love to know the history of the machines that they're using that language on. How did that come to be? With still a significant fraction of Perl 5.8 and Perl 5.10. And this is also showing the release dates and potentially the consequences of those release dates on language adoption over time. And we can see this relative desert of new Perl 5 releases between 2000 and 2010. So that by 2010, I think, the new adoption of the language was at a very low rate. So we don't see very many people using Perl 5.12 because probably nobody was installing it, and nobody has installed it since. But then we saw this transition to regular yearly releases, and that has had, I think very clearly in the data, a very significant consequence over time that more and more people are using later releases, and these are new adopters of the language. These are not people who are upgrading from 5.6 or 5.10. These are people who are coming to Perl for the first time and saying, "Oh, hey, here's a language. I'll install it, and then I'll keep on using it." That's my reading of this of these data, and I think it really speaks to the vitality and robustness of the Perl community, that there was this relatively long hiatus where people were struggling, where the community was struggling with how to get new builds of the language out. And since 2010, with this clockwork-like release cadence and significant feature enhancements drawn from Perl 6 and elsewhere, we have seen that driving growth of the language and that driving adoption. And I think this is one of the things that, as I said, in 2014, yeah, people were, there was a lot of angst around the language, 2012, 2014, in that range. But I honestly believe that we are in the midst of a potentially significant Perl renaissance, where people are coming back to the language, they're looking at it with new eyes, and they're finding incredible capabilities in CBAN and in some of these new features. I have to say that the native Perl object system was one of the things that motivated me to migrate away from Perl in the early 2000s, because it was work, and I'm not smart enough to. I had to think too much, and I have played around with Moose a little bit, and it's fun. It makes objects easy.
Yeah, it feels like a different language almost. It feels like you're writing, like when I use it, it feels like I'm writing in Moose, and I need to just glue these things together by writing Perl now and again.
That's a very good way of putting it. Yeah, yeah. And I have not explored the landscape of smaller mooses, sub-mooses. But it looks very interesting. But that is a reflection of the more than one way to do it philosophy, where you don't need this very large creature, and moose really are very large creatures. You can get something which is more minimal and better suited to your needs. So it's a technology I'd like to dig into and learn more about. And one of the things I find, having come back to Perl in the last year and looked at it seriously again as a language, is the one thing that I've missed about Perl all along are the regexes.
Mm-hmm.
Every language supports them somehow. There's something about Perl regexes that are just better, more friendly. The fact that they're a first-class component of the language. In Python, there's a regex module. You have to load it, you have to compile things, you have to do all this stuff. Whereas Perl, I can just type it. It's being a first-class citizen is one of the things that I think makes Perl one of the friendliest languages for text processing.
Yeah, if you're into it's ready to match to match some text against whatever you want to throw at it at any moment. Just being able to write regexes right on the metal, if you will. Yeah, and that's what you just described is something that really struck me in this little bit. I mentioned this game I made in Python, and it struck me like I only used regexes a handful of times, but it felt like I was missing something. The fact I had to like type more in order to like get the regex to work. I also used regexes like when I was using ObjectiveC. Like I have some iOS apps, and that it seemed like wrapping them in 5 layers of parentheses and methods calling other methods under packages. That seemed in character for the ObjectiveC escape, and that was not offensive to me or as strange to me, I should say, as using an interpreted scripting language, but having to do all this rigmarole and preambles to get regexes to work. And I guess, yeah, it just reminded me just how close I am always working in everything I'm doing to text and receiving some text and comparing it to some other text. And Perl is just there's no faster way to get into the pattern matching than Perl.
Yeah, and it's a surprising thing because you would think it's a small thing because the same functionality is there in all these other languages, but it's been a surprisingly just a significant irritant for me. And you come back to Perl and it's like, oh, that irritant's gone. It's a very nice thing. Do you do a lot of text processing in terms of what your business is? Are you doing a lot of text processing? And are you doing any sort of analytics, big data? Do you see people wanting to do that kind of thing?
I am not into big data. Like I mentioned the airline thing, and that is more just writing a lot of loops and trying to get them to run as fast as possible. I mean, and that I'm sure that every script I've written in that has 100 regexes in it, and I've forgotten writing them because it is such second nature. So I guess I should say yes. In my consulting, which is for the most part writing web applications, that of course is all about text processing because you're dumping out HTML at some point. But I use frameworks that usually abstract a lot of that away from me. Back when I started, you'd write scripts that would hand knit these monstrous SQL statements together, and then you would use CGI, which that was Perl's first big domain killer app, the CGI.vm, and you'd use that to hand knit an HTML output. It has been a long time since I've done that, and I will reach for these tools occasionally, but for the stuff I get paid for, I don't necessarily think of a lot of heavy-duty text processing, even though everything I'm writing is by definition doing a lot of heavy-duty text processing.
Yeah, under the hood. What version of the language are you on now, personally?
I was waiting for you to ask. That's just one of those questions where I just logged into a bunch of machines that I have access to, typed Perl-V on all of them, and I just scattered everywhere. On my own laptop, my generic Perl I'm using, if I don't put any other arguments in, is 5.18.
Yeah.
On my server at jmac.org, it's 5.22. But on my laptop, I have a bunch of Perls installed because I use a tool called Perl Brew, which is one of several tools that allow you to have a mix of different Perl development environments. And Python has its own.
Yeah. We use Perl Brew very heavily here because we're building, everything back to 5.
It is great. With a colleague of mine who I do a lot of my work with has been teaching me to be less sloppy about this and use Carton, which is another great technology for making sure, for a specific project, to always use the same version of Perl and the same version of CPAN modules whenever you're running tests, for example, to make so that my version and his version always test the same, and my version of this module is different than this. But yeah, to get back to your actual question, I have a variety of versions, and I don't pay a lot of attention, and this is on me, to the differences and improvements between Perl versions. As you said, the core Perl 5 porters team has introduced fantastic. They start off as experimental features, and then they are either this isn't very good and rolled away, or they are then made canonical parts of the language because that's what you get to do if you have 8 releases annually. And they have introduced many fantastic new language and syntax features, and I basically don't use them. Other than I picked up Moose. I have picked up DBIX class, which is a whole nother family of stuff that is outside the core that has really transformed the way I do day-to-day programming. But as far as core language updates, I keep updating so that I keep the exploits and the other badness away. But I don't necessarily myself in the code that I write take advantage of new core features.
Sure, that's understandable, particularly when you're working across platforms and environments where you may not have control over what version is installed. It does make sense to be a little more conservative in language feature adoption. And it's certainly the uniformity of installs is one of the things that is quite significant for our business, because we can provide the same version of Perl on Solaris and Windows if people are running that combination. And it increases the level of security that people have around upgrading porting code, what have you. I'm not actually sure what the next slide is. Oh yeah, here we are. So we asked people in this survey what they were using Perl for. And for the people who are using it as individuals, you can see this is sort of a word cloud of the popular answers.
That is some big data.
Pardon me?
I made a joke. I said that is some big data because it's
there. You go. Yeah.
Data, but it's large in stature.
Yeah, it is some big data. So there's a lot of data processing, and we were expecting, a lot of web-based stuff, and that was only 7 to 10% of the use, especially for individuals. And that's one of the things that brought me to this idea that a lot of people are using Perl to just process data inside their company. They have little transformation tasks that they want to generate a script for, and you'll see automation right there in between text and data that they don't want to do it by hand. It needs to be easy. They need to just work. They take some files, they take some data out of databases, they do some processing, and they get the number that they need. And there are still other things like see up at the top, bioinformatics is still a significant use of Perl, and those are probably academics who are doing that kind of thing. And down at the bottom, there's parsing, which came up quite a lot across the board, where people are concerned with textual analysis of one kind or another.
That has crossover with bioinformatics and just about everything else too.
Yes, absolutely. When you're looking at the more text-based bioinformatic type processing, which is a whole other thing, but Perl is very good for. So that was a bit of a revelation that people were using it for this very wide range of things. And if you look at some of the words, there's things like quick and fast and easy. You do find if we bump along to the corporate uses, we have even bigger data, lots of processing, lots of analysis, but there are a few things where people are, there are words like legacy and already that show up in there where it's people were just, they inherited that system.
Sure.
But nonetheless, as I've said from the other data, it's very clear that we have lots of people coming to the language for the new time, for the first time, which I think is really exciting. And I write Perl like it was 2005. So I'm quite interested in sitting back down with the language and learning some of these new features that have been introduced in the meantime. And I have always felt that, I'm doing Python now mostly. I'll probably never go back, and I'm not sure that's the case anymore. I can see things in Perl that are the things that made me love it originally, and it now has all these modern features, like most, that address the issues that I was having with it, back in the day. So it's a very exciting time, I think. I think, where are we? We're good, apparently. When you're doing web app type stuff, are you using Catalyst, things like that, in terms of frameworks?
Yeah. So my own sort of personal Perl renaissance, if you will, came around in 2007, 2008, when I first sort of hung my own shingle out. So I was a salaried, hacker for several years, and then I tried to do a game startup, and that didn't work out so good. So I said, I'm going to go into consulting. And to my own great fortune, one of the first projects I got involved with, which I found on jobs.perl.org, which is a great website for both finding and being a Perl hacker, was with the Maine Historical Society, which you can find at mainhistory.org. That is a nonprofit who is just what they sound like. They are the Historical Society of the state of Maine in the U.S., and they have a fantastic online catalog of all these historical artifacts that are gathered from smaller historical societies all over this mostly rural state, and then scanned or digitized or photographed one way or the other, and then made into this beautiful, browsable, publicly browsable catalog. And when I started with the project, the engineer who was already there had himself inherited the system that was based around a photo album CGI script from 1990X, and had transformed it, or rather wrapped around it, a Catalyst-based application that was based on Catalyst and DVIX abstract. And I had never seen anything of all the projects that were already software projects that were already in progress when I joined them. I had never seen anything so organized and beautiful and so fun to work with. And I have been a Catalyst devotee ever since. In the Perl world, there are a number of popular frameworks right now. Catalyst is sort of seen as the grandparent of all of them, but very popular also are Dancer and Mojolicious. But as with other languages, I look at these and I nod, and I love to see the work people are doing with them. And I continue to stick with Catalyst because enough people, it still absolutely has enough of a critical mass of users that I never feel stuck in up the creek with it.
And you've got your own Perl project on the go in your blogging software.
Oh yeah, Plurd. That is a separate bag of apples. But yes, that's basically not literally the first open source software project that I have launched since sort of getting into the GitHub groove, but it's the first one that it's collected like more than 1 star, so that's exciting. It might be up to the double digits now, but yeah, that is a piece of software for a single person. It's intended for use of a single person, but I'm always open to creative uses of a given system. But basically, it lets you very quickly create and maintain a blog by maintaining a directory of Markdown files in a folder somewhere, and you can sync this over Dropbox, and then a blog is a completely static blog is magically created, and you never have to log into anything or upload anything to anything else. You just edit files on a text file, and then a blog happens over here. Yeah, and that is all written in Perl. It is a fairly simple piece of software. It's so if you want to see what moosey code written by me looks like, you can go to what is it, github.org/jmac.org/plurd, and there it is.
Cool. I've been meaning to have a look at it personally. I use WordPress, which is a great ugly behemoth, and
yes.
simplicity and cleanliness of and something that just produces a static blog seems to be very valuable. I'm getting a signal here that we should be wrapping up and taking questions. So it's been great talking to you. Looking forward to meeting you at YAPC
Likewise.
next week. Jason and I have known each other for 15 years? I don't know, a long time.
Live journey buddies.
Indeed, yeah, that long ago.
And the Perl project, point out.
That's true, it is, yeah. So, do we have questions? Question, which language, in your opinion, will outlive the other, Perl 5 or Perl 6? Of course, in your personal opinion, was Larry right when he started to develop Perl 6 instead of transforming Perl 5 into something else?
I can give you my thoughts on the latter one first,
Sure.
because Larry has every right to follow his own heart, and that is what he did with Perl 6. Perl 5, like I I don't know how all the legal and or political and social movements that allow this were, but Perl 5 is in the hands of a team of cycling and self-perpetuating people who love Perl 5. And as we were talking about, for several years now have done a fantastic job just keeping it alive and relevant and always up to date. And and that has freed Larry up to work on his baby, which is Perl 6. Yeah. And I think that's fantastic for everybody. I think that's a win for everybody. So yes, Larry was right. And he did the right thing in not holding Perl. No, you can't work on Perl 5 because that's not who Larry is. And I think that the world is better for all this. Yep. Which language will outlive the other? I don't. That's the sort of question where my knee-jerk response is to sort of dismiss it as an interesting question, because I don't see. I guess, well, yes, languages can die, and a language dies when nobody uses it anymore, or nobody uses it, or it falls below a critical mass of enough people continue to use it and care about it that it stops growing and developing. I don't know. I can't answer that question any better than which will outlive the other, Perl 5 or Swift. I don't know. They're buddies. They are 5 and 6 are family members. They're more than buddies. They're related. But I've read really well thought out articles from people in the Perl community who do see a challenge to adopt one or the other, or both are doomed to fade away. I don't have strong opinions on this one way or the other. I see them as two different programming languages that they are blood related, but I don't see them as I don't assume that they're in competition or anything like that. I don't know the answer to that question. That's a long-winded.
I think we're pretty much on the same page. I think when we talk about programming languages dying, but it happens incredibly rarely. The language or impactor that ran into that comment last year was running about a half a dozen chips that were fourth machines. I don't know if you ever heard of fourth, but it was back in the 80s. And it still has a niche in a very, very low power hardware. And it turned out that there were these chips that run fourth natively that turned out to be the best technological solution for that particular project. So I don't think it makes a lot of sense to talk about the longevity of languages. I expect that people will be writing Perl 5 and Perl 6 long after all of us are gone to dust.
Yeah, I think Perl 6 has a challenge ahead of it first, which is a more interesting question to finish being boring, frankly. Yeah. Because it now exists and people can use it, but I don't know, and it may be that it's already found this and I haven't heard of it yet. That's entirely possible, and I might learn about it next week, but it still needs to find, other than Larry has been driven by forces beyond his control to push it out, it still needs to find the answer to the question of why it exists. I'm sure the answer is there. It's probably there many, many times, and it has a great future ahead of it. But that's what
future in Perl 6, and it's a question of where are they going to land. So we have a question: why isn't Perl evolving in data analytics, since Perl regex is very good in file handling? I'm not sure that I agree with the premise of the question. I think our data show that it is evolving in data analytics.
I wouldn't know. I'm not a data analystician, so analyzer. I just ship stuff. So I
am an analyzer, and I've used Python a lot, including for text analysis. And I've never, I've always missed some of the text handling features of Perl. And I'm looking forward to playing more in that space with Perl, because I think it's extremely well suited to it. And I think a lot of people like me are going to be waking up and noticing that as time goes on. What about using PDK? How does the speed of the executable compare to the Perl command line in C? So PDK is a Perl development kit, which is a thing that ActiveState sells.
Okay.
That, amongst other things, lets you wrap a Perl application up into an executable and then distribute your executable. And the answer is that we're still running a Perl interpreter underneath, so it doesn't run at native C execution speeds or anything like it. But I've used similar technologies to distribute small applications inside the enterprise. So if you have a little bit of code that you need a salesperson to be able to run, being able to take a Perl script and wrap it up. This is a side question, but I know you do mostly web stuff, but if you were building a Perl app with UI, what UI toolkit would you use?
Boy, there are questions I would need to research before we even got to that one. Like when you say with UI, do you mean like a GUI or just like a command line thing?
A GUI.
I have no idea.
Okay.
There are excellent answers to that question. It is not a thing I've ever done. Like the first thing I think of is camel bones, which probably doesn't exist anymore, but that was one of these attempts one sees, and this is not so much a Perl thing as on other languages, to like make a Mac OS X software using Perl, and you can do it,
right.
Technically speaking, but you do not want to do that.
Right.
Yeah. No, I'm really married to the web as far as UIs, the web or the command line.
There are some attempts to do sort of WebKit style UI, WebKit on the desktop style UI for Perl, which I think is interesting. It's an idea that has been put about for multiple languages many times, and I don't think anybody's quite figured out how to do it yet. So the idea is you write your web app, but then you can run it on the desktop as well, but I've yet to see an approach to that is really compelling or truly functional.
Well, that seems to be sort of feedback from mobile, actually, because one does see that in like I have written, not in Perl, but like I've written a JavaScript web app that then is intended to be installed as an icon on your iPhone or whatever, and then you run it out.
Right. Yeah. So the web is taking over in that regard. Perl. Oh, has Perl handled fixed heartbleed, shell shock, glibc bugs? Yes, is the short answer. The Perl community. I mean, in ActiveState, we get these reports and we push out stuff as quickly as we can, and that's true across the Perl community. I think that the Perl community has been very good and very responsive to security issues of all kinds. In 524, for example, there's a fix for this canon path bug where tainting was being lost, the taint status of a string was being lost. And it was one of those things, that it was identified, a fix was found, and it was shipped. And I think that's very characteristic of the way the Perl community at large has dealt with security bugs. That's my experience. I mean, in your business, you must care a great deal about security being
and the way that we handle it is just to take advantage of the work that everyone else is doing and just keeping everything up to date.
Yeah.
And from our perspective, it magically fixes itself because of elves.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And very grateful for those elves.
Yep.
Do you think a mid-level Perl dev should learn other languages? If so, which?
Well, what do you want to do? If you want to do something that is best handled with another language, you should learn that language. I learned Objective-C because I wanted to publish iOS apps. And like I said, there are hacks where you can say, no, I insist on writing my iOS app in JavaScript or Python or Perl. You can do that, but you are giving yourself so much pain because, no, there is a domain-specific language for this, and you should learn that.
Yeah.
And so, yes, that is why I learned Objective-C. If you want to just just for recreational purposes, and just keep yourself mentally flexible, and you just say, I use Perl as a general purpose language, and I want to use a second general purpose language, sure. That's not, I think about doing that every now and again, and I personally don't do it because I would rather make something new than learn a new tool for making things. If I already know how to make the thing I want to make.
I learned some Haskell last year, simply because I wanted to know what all the hype was about. And I think it is valuable to learn not just a general purpose language, but I think there's some value in learning a language which is weird and different compared to because it teaches you new ways to think and gives you different perspectives on these problems. But other than that, I agree. If you've got a problem where there's a domain-specific language that's the appropriate tool, learn that language.
I'll add as an addendum a trend I've seen in the Perl community, which I really enjoy, and we've seen this in recent Perl conferences, is basically picking some weird language that doesn't have a spotlight on it and isn't Perl, and saying, let's all go learn this, and let's have talks about this. And last year there was a lot of excitement about Go at the Perl conference, and there were like 2-day long tutorials attached to the conference just about Go, because like, hey, this is a really interesting language that's doing some cool stuff. Let's all learn it together. And I really like seeing that. Because that makes both the languages stronger, that makes their users smarter, and that encourages more crosstalk that just improves everything. Go and Swift are on my list of languages to learn recreationally. I did some ObjectiveC way back in the day. I was an early adopter of NextStep, which was but Go in particular is a language that I've heard nothing but good things about, and I think it's definitely worth having a look at. There were so many questions, we could not answer them all. We'll be doing There's one last question above it. There's one last question above it that you skipped over.
I didn't see.
Yeah.
What was the, okay, hang on a second. I'll see if I can scroll up here before we run out of time. Last question. Who is the heir of Perl after Larry Wall? Will Perl keep going even when Larry is not around? I didn't see it for the first part. Sure.
Yeah. You know the answer to the first part, or?
No.
Basically, Perl 5 is run by a team of engineers. The core engineers call themselves the Perl 5 porters. I'm sure there's a good reason for that. It is not lost to history. It is. I do not know why.
I believe that referred to actually porting Perl across systems back in the 90s.
That makes perfect sense to me. And again, this is not a community that I myself am involved with, so I cannot speak to how it operates. But my understanding is that it is a team. The head of the team has the nickname the Pump King, and you can look up for yourself why they are called the Pump King. But this is a role that passes fairly regularly, so it doesn't ever become static. It's not stuck with one person. And through this sort of cycling and new members coming on and off, that's basically a lot of why, in my opinion, not observation, a lot of why the language and the caretaking and the stewardship over the language has continued to be as dynamic and alive and active as it has been. So Perl 5 actually hasn't been in Larry Wall's hands in quite a while, and it's been in very good hands. Perl 6, that is currently where like Larry himself has been putting all his attention, and I cannot speak to that, and I do not know what the Perl 6 line of succession is, but given how well Perl 5 has been handled, I don't worry for that language's culture either.
Nor do I. So I think we are out of time. It has been great talking to you. Oh, we have a little bit of data there, yeah, on our Perl survey, which is just a redisplay. We are selling our Komodo IDE, which has just had version 10 released, which is a great Perl IDE and has lots of features for other languages as well. It supports PHP, Python. We've had our Q&A. We have ActiveState, how you contact us all over the web, and that is how you find Jason, who does all kinds of amazing things beyond just Perl in interactive fiction and various other enterprises. So it's been great talking to you. Looking forward to seeing you in Orlando next week.
Yeah, likewise, Tom. This is a lot of fun. Thank you for inviting me on to talk about my favorite programming language.
Great. Thank you.